is the DeFi Decoded podcast by 9 Point Partners. The ideas and opinions expressed in this podcast should not be taken as investment advice. Always consult with your financial advisor before investing.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of DeFi Decoded. I am Alex Tapscott here with Andrew Young. Andrew, last week I was in New York for the Coinbase Institutional Summit. This is an event that they host, bringing together lots of different types of people from the financial world, from the banks, from pension funds and other allocators, as well as traditional hedge funds and crypto asset funds too. It was a pretty terrific show. There were several different speakers representing the gamut, from the head of ETFs at BlackRock to sitting Congress people to Mark Cuban, who also popped in for a surprise talk. And the impression that I got overall was that this cycle seems to be one where there are a lot of institutional investors that are taking a serious look at the space. I think that's probably obvious by now, given what we've seen from the launch of the ETFs. But still, it was pretty impressive to see so many people wielding so much capital all in one room with a view on the market. That's something I actually have not seen in quite that way before. The other thing that I noticed was that there seems to be a consensus that is forming around the future of Web3 or the future of financial services and crypto. And I would say that it sort of follows this sort of two-pronged approach, or what I would call like a dual mandate. On one side of the mandate, companies like BlackRock and others see opportunities to use ETFs and other traditional fund structures as a way to bring the asset class to the market. And the person on stage said something really interesting about ETFs. She said, ETFs themselves are a form of financial technology. If you wanted to buy municipal bonds, for example, it would be pretty tricky to do that. You'd have to call up your bank and who do you speak to? But you can own it in an ETF. So an ETF is a technology solution that solves a problem for investors. And she said for Bitcoin, they view it similarly. Bitcoin ETFs are a solution that solves a problem for certain investors who prefer to own it in their 401k or want to own it and see it in a consolidated snapshot. So that's one part of the approach. The other part of the approach, the more interesting part in my opinion, is that there was a consensus forming that the future of tokenization and Wall Street's adoption of this technology is going to happen on public blockchain infrastructure. And by that, I mean platforms like Ethereum and, to a lesser extent, Solana and all these others. And that's a big departure because those of us who've been around long enough will recall a time in, the early days of blockchain adoption when the discussion was around building closed networks, proprietary blockchains, permissioned blockchains, that all these financial firms would agree to join and use a kind of shared distributed ledger, but that wasn't really a public blockchain in the traditional sense. And the analogy that I've used in the past is that in the early days of the web, a lot of people were interested in networking computers and using this new software and functionality, but they didn't like the idea of the open web, so they built intranets. And intranets eventually were subsumed by the internet, and I think the same thing can be said here. And part of the reason is that the technology is ready for prime time. And that was another takeaway, was that with the introduction of layer 2 networks on Ethereum, with the move to proof of stake, with some of the other network upgrades that have happened, the public blockchain world is somewhere where big institutions can actually build. And this is something that I think surprised me a little bit, because it wasn't that we were talking about both sides and having merit. It was very much that we'd shifted to this new direction. And to me, that was really encouraging, because that's something I think we've been talking about, obviously, for years together, and then also on the show. What do you make of that new evolution in Wall Street's thinking?
Yeah, I definitely agree with it. I mean, I think ETFs have been, I would say, the best sort of financial innovation we've ever, I would say that the best financial innovation of the last 50 years in terms of its impact in lowering costs and then with like the more exotic ETFs, like you said, like the muni ETFs and whatnot, increasing access. And I think one of the things that got me really excited about crypto initially was like it was a whole new asset class, like a whole new way of tokenizing different assets that used to not be tokenized.
Yeah.
And so I think I guess in a way you can think about it, it sort of puts a wrapper on assets that previously weren't tradable, similar to how ETFs did the same. Though
Yeah.
I guess the difference here obviously is ETFs for the most part are, and I guess that's actually kind of similar in a lot of ways. ETFs bring assets that only institutional traders used to be able to access, and kind of bring it down to the retail level.
Bingo.
And I guess in a lot of ways that's what crypto does. Like in the sense that like a lot of these sort of types of startups and things like that you could only really access them until the coins were, or the companies were public. And nowadays most companies go public way later than they used to. Like I think it was something like Microsoft, since it went public, it has like over 1,000x. Actually, I have to get the exact multiple. Whereas like nowadays, Uber went public like 7 years ago, and it's I think maybe like less than a 10x for sure. Just because all of those gains were, only experienced by institutional investors, i.e. VCs.
Well, some people would say that crypto assets, at least in the early days, were an asset class that totally flipped the script. The biggest winners from the Ethereum ICO or from Bitcoin, the early days of the network, were just hobbyists and everyday people by and large. There were some high net worth individuals and some funds maybe that participated, but that it's only now that things have gone back to sort of a similar way of sorts, right? Where a lot of the early allocations or opportunities to invest do happen at the VC stage. Now, you can be a user of a network, earn an airdrop, or if it's a project that's got a more fair distribution as a member of the community, you can get in early. But definitely seems like we've tilted back towards the institutions.
Yeah, that's kind of like one of the saddest parts about the whole space. And it's also part of the reason why airdrops have become so important, because if you want to essentially get exposure, get access, ownership access to a project that you're very bullish on, the only real way you can get access if you're not able to be a brand name angel or you're invested through sort of a VC fund, is to use the chain, use all these different like apps on the chain, and then just hope that qualifies you for an airdrop. It's gone to the point now where there's almost like institutional airdrop farmers. And the chain, it's like this crazy cat and mouse game where the chains are trying to prevent non-organic users from getting access to their airdrop.
Yeah.
And so they're creating all these like crazy detection things where, like, oh, this guy looks like he's part of this like group of 100 different, or actually more like 1,000 people. So therefore, like, he gets no airdrop. The best example of that is actually this project called Layer Zero, which is a bridge. And some estimates are that like up to 70 or 80% of their total usage is just people trying to farm their airdrop. And only 20% of people are actually using the bridge because they want to use the bridge. And the Layer Zero team, I just followed them on Twitter. They've spent weeks going through every single person that's used their bridge to figure out if it's organic or non-organic. And they keep putting out these reports being like, these people are not going to qualify for the airdrop. And then it like provokes all this backlash. And so it's just this like crazy game that it's kind of like reached its like comical conclusion.
Yeah.
And that's why we were kind of speculating on the show a couple of weeks ago, like what's going to be the next meta, just because it seems like airdrops are very much at the end of it. And that's kind of like where we came up with this whole I came up with this whole like meme coin idea. Again, it's not even clear if that's going to be the new sort of meta, but I still think that the best meta in a lot of ways is exactly what you said, which was crypto's early days, where you could just buy into the Ethereum ICO or the Polkadot ICO with money, crypto, and then that gave you similar access to VCs, actually identical access. But then obviously for regulatory reasons, that's been shut down. So,
well, let's hold that thought on meme coins, because we want to get back to that at the end of the show. One of the other takeaways from the conference was that a lot of firms were looking at the success that Coinbase has had launching Base. Now, Base at its peak was generating, I think, $1 million a day of fee revenue, network revenue. And a lot of that was projects, doing all sorts of different stuff. But one of the other things that Coinbase has said is that it wants to move more of its own business processes on-chain and views Base as part of that solution. And so the talk was, well, if it works for Coinbase and they can unlock all this value, would other financial institutions, more traditional financial institutions, launch their own layer twos as a way to maybe capture some value from the market? Let's say it's a more traditional market. There are issuers that want to launch products on your platform. They want to do it on chain. They want to create a tokenized version of XYZ. They'll do it on the Goldman Sachs layer 2 or the Franklin Templeton layer 2. I'm not saying these firms for any reason other than just to illustrate the point. And then another thing is, well, you can also, if you're going to do your own tokenization projects and your own, DeFi work, whatever it might be, that you'd want to also do it on your own network, right? And that leads to this very interesting thought experiment of, well, how many layer 2 networks are there going to be? You've mentioned this before in the past, that there was some concern or some discussion that, some layer 2 network would come along and would be super dominant, and then that would actually take away value from the Ethereum network, as more value would be settling on the layer 2 than on the main chain. And that the fact that there are so many layer 2 networks is a sign that the hub of Ethereum, the main chain, is going to remain super valuable. What happens in a world where we have like thousands of layer 2s issued? What if like Pepsi has a layer 2 and Manulife Financial and Exxon Mobil? Is that where we're going, or is this going to coalesce? I mean, sometimes I just feel like I get introduced to these new ideas and it just completely upends my understanding of things. So please help me make sense of it.
Yeah, that relates to my favorite saying that's been going around, which is more chains than apps, more apps than users. And so that totally makes sense. Well, I think on the institutional L2s, I think the most likely like new breed of L2s will be similar to Coinbase. So they'll be more like crypto native like applications, whether that's centralized exchanges or even wallets, or I don't know, like pretty much anything. Even like I could see like media companies launching their own L2s around their specific use case, because it's so easy to spin up an L2 now. And if you have the tech around L2s, from what I can see, it seems relatively commoditized. It's all about distribution now. And so if you already have an existing user base that's somewhat crypto native, launching your own L2, is a way to like build an open source ecosystem, whether that's developers and users and things like that around your already pre-built community. So I think it makes a lot of sense. I actually think this is what you're talking about right now is pretty emblematic of what I think is peak infrastructure. So like, there's this great, I think it's Chris Dixon, I believe, but maybe not, where it's like this idea of that like infrastructure drives apps, which then drives new infrastructure, in the sense that they both pull each other forward.
Yeah.
And I think right now we're, again, like I said, like peak infrastructure. There's way too many chains and way too few many apps that actually have a value prop, let alone like a user base. And so I think I'm incredibly bullish right now on like application token sector, whatever you want to call it, because there is so many L2s and L1s searching for a relatively small pool of applications with users. And I actually just sent you a link in our private chat, but I think this is a very good example of it. So the big news of today, for example, is this L2 called ZK Sync.
Yeah.
They just launched their token for their own ZK L2. And they actually, reports came out that they actually had paid Lens, which is this like social media app started by the founder of Aave, which is the leading sort of DeFi lending protocol. So like a very, very strong founding team. They paid Lens 0.5% of their token supply to launch their app on top of their chain. And that comes out to like $23 million at the current price. So they essentially paid, and Lens apparently shopped it around to tons of different L2s looking for the best deal. And it was like an open, like kind of a bidding war. And that kind of just goes to show you that there's like, to me, the power, the leverage between applications and infrastructure right now is sort of in the application side. And which, funny enough, which we can talk a little bit about as well, is for the most part, those tokens have done by far the worst. So like L2s and L1s have done very well for the most part, and application tokens have done very poorly. It's part of this, you sort of told me at the start of the show, altcoin dispersion sort of idea.
Well, I was going to say, I'm not sure, I think that probably app coins have fared worse than L2s and some L1s, but actually more recently, everything seems to be doing pretty poorly. And the only names that aren't are Bitcoin and to a lesser extent ETH. Like even ETH on the back of ETF news couldn't really hold the gains. It's at around $3,400. It was at 3,200 before the ETF and got almost as high as 4,000. So let's talk about this idea of altcoin dispersion. So maybe just to summarize, the idea is, this is an early stage, this relatively early stage market. A lot of these applications and networks are new. There's demand from investors for underlying use cases as well as for people who are speculating. And if we end up with just tons of networks, more networks than apps, more apps than users, then you have this sort of a fixed amount of money chasing an ever greater number of opportunities. And that just means that there's going to be less money invested in any single one. And I'm not talking about VC money. I'm just talking about dollars in the open market that are sort of being allocated to different networks. Now, this is a criticism that people used to have of Bitcoin. They said, what if all these coins that come along take away demand from Bitcoin? Or what if there's, some new coin that takes over Bitcoin? And my response to that was always, I thought that Bitcoin was a uniquely differentiated asset, and that if anything, more crypto assets were good for Bitcoin, because what it did was demonstrate the value of blockchains as a medium of exchange and store of value. And that was going to strengthen the case for owning the major asset that had the longest track record. And that was pretty true. Ethereum launched in 2014, funded in 2014, launched in 15. And Ethereum went from $1 to, $5,000 in the same period that Bitcoin went from $600 to 69,000. So yes, Ethereum outperformed in that market, but it certainly didn't diminish the value proposition of Bitcoin. If anything, it maybe strengthened it, right? Yet today, there does seem to be this point of view that there's just too many goddamn coins out there. And maybe some of them are these meme coins are just kind of sucking away incremental risk capital from other networks. Could be that we're just in the sort of middle of a bull market correction, which is what I have been saying previously. But maybe with some of these smaller coins, it feels a bit different. What's your take?
Yeah, no, I think that's spot on. I think so I read that same, I think, like Twitter thread or maybe some article. There's now 2.5 million tokens, which is already 6x the peak of the amount of tokens we had in the last cycle.
Too many.
It's completely
insane. Who's to say what is or isn't too many? But it seems like a lot.
Yeah. So what's interesting actually is I've now come around. I've actually become quite bullish, funny enough, on the market. Whereas, like I would say, the last 3 months I've been somewhat, not nearly as bullish as I am now, and I kind of just thought the whole space was a bit crazy.
Yeah.
And the reason I'm bullish is there are so many tokens launching that have no value and no substance whatsoever that we're sort of getting fatigue, I think, on that side. And we can talk a little bit about Politifi, which is like this new class of meme coins that have been doing really well. But let's sort of set that aside for now. I think we're at peak fatigue of flash over substance. And I think we're now finally, I think the conditions are set for a return to substance. So what do I mean by substance? These are projects that have a real value prop. They have the ability to monetize if they haven't already monetized. And most importantly, they don't have a crazy supply overhang the way that all of these like new chains and particularly meme coins as well have. So what I mean by supply overhang is when a new project launches, they typically have a 4-year lockup cycle. So what that means is like the founders and early VCs, they receive tokens, whether sometimes it's monthly, sometimes it's quarterly, but they receive them continuously over the course of 4 years. And so, so the problem with that is that typically they launch with a really low supply.
Yeah.
And so their price is artificially inflated relative to like the fundamentals.
Yeah.
And then over time, the price just bleeds out as more and more supply comes online. And so I think that's become like pretty apparent that game is just like can't last. I mean, again, I could be wrong. Like if Bitcoin and Ethereum 2x from here, who knows? Everything goes up. But I do think there's going to be kind of a snapback to high quality assets over the summer, and particularly ones, like I said, that have already kind of gone through the vesting cycle and have less supply overhang and have like more fundamentals. I think the one area that's not true is probably the Politifi Memecoins, which we can talk about a little bit later. But I guess before we get into that, I'm just curious, putting aside the Politifi Memecoins aside, I'm just curious like what you think. Any like final thoughts on that?
I love the idea of having this trough of disillusionment. There's all these people who probably got into crypto for the first time recently, buying up these meme coins, and maybe they've had their ass handed to them for the first time, and that's causing them to get sour on the speculative end of the tail, which I think, to your point, is probably good in the long run because it'll highlight the value of platforms more. I think it's no secret that we're both like pretty big ETH bulls on the show. And it's just entirely based on fundamentals. It's got nothing to do with sentiment because the sentiment is pretty terrible. Like you've talked about this, most hated asset, within the whole system. So yeah, I agree. I think it's an interesting take. So let's move on to the Politifi stuff. So you've talked about these meme coins, Tramp and Joe Biden and all these other things. You're going to have to help us out here, Andrew. So there are these coins that are politician themed. They are created by fans, or if not fans, people are parodying, politicians. And I guess they're just like memes and they have communities around them. But the price seems to react to what's going on in the world, right? I think the news recently is that Trump may actually be considering launching his own official coin, which of course he is. It's like ties and stakes and everything else. It's an opportunity to slap his name on something and make a quick buck. And that his son Barron might be leading the charge on this. And I just don't know what's going on. So there's another Trump coin that you would think like if there's an official Trump coin that will harm the value of the existing Trump coin. But my understanding is that name's outperformed Bowden and some of these others.
So So you're correct. So Politifi coins have actually been getting destroyed because for the most part there's like 8 or 9 Trump ones, and there's kind of this like one famous Biden one called Joe Biden. It's Joe Biden spelled obviously wrong.
Yeah.
And to put this in context, the like Politifi sector, according to CoinGecko, has $1 billion market cap.
Yeah.
It's sort of split, like I said, it's split between about 5 or so somewhat big Trump coins, and then that like one Joe Biden. But for the most part, the Trump coins are all down like 50%.
And I think there's a Bobby coin too.
Bobby, yeah. Oh, is there Bobby? Yeah, there's
Bobby Kennedy.
Yeah, there's everything. There's a Kamala Harris. There's a Alex Jones, Jill Bowden. Robert Kennedy. Anyways, so whatever. Meme coins are just about capturing attention. I would kind of say they're like a super turbocharged version of Trump's company that's public, like the one that loses like $100 million a quarter. The Truth Social. Yeah.
Yeah.
This is a pure form. They don't even pretend to have a business. It's just pure memes. Anyways, yeah. So the rumor right now is that Trump. The rumor is that Barron Trump, so Trump's son, who apparently has been rumored to be advocating for crypto to Trump himself, like behind the scenes. He's obviously, I think he's like only 19 years old, probably uses crypto a little bit, sort of understands it at least. So the rumor is that it was reported by Pirate Wires, which is a fairly prominent sort of tech and VC focused news media company. They reported on this that DJT, which is like Donald Trump coin, was launched in conjunction with Barron helping it. And again, these are unstamped. These rumors haven't been confirmed yet, but the coin has gone crazy. It's up to it's done $400 million in trading volume in its first 24 hours. And there's all these rumors flying around, whether it's, is it real? Is it not? It's up 400% in its first day. And I think it's almost surpassed the MAGA coin, which is like the current main Trump coin, which has a market cap of 300 million. Anyways, who knows? Like, it makes, in a lot of ways, it sort of makes sense, because over the last couple of weeks, one of the big things that's been happening, which again to me signals that we're near the end of the sort of meme coin era, but has been these things called celeb coins. So essentially, celebrities have been launching their own coins. Famously, Caitlyn Jenner did it, and then Iggy Azalea actually launched her own coin, which has been doing really well. And then I think like Andrew Tate did. Like, it's kind of absurd. But what's interesting again with the Politifi is that obviously like the election is going to be going on for another 4 months at least. Actually, I guess November. And so like there's kind of like an inbuilt narrative and hype cycle that's going to be going for the next couple of months. And what's interesting about it is that the price of these coins actually follows the betting odds for the different candidates.
Yeah.
And in a lot of ways, it represents almost like a leveraged bet, because with a prediction market, or like, if you place a bet on Trump to win, one, you have to wait 4 months to see if you're right or wrong.
Yeah.
But then also, like, there's not a lot of leverage built into it. Like, for the most part, the odds have been relatively 50-50. So if I bet 100 grand 4 months from now, maybe I'll make 200 or I'll make 100.
Yeah.
Whereas with these meme coins, you could buy 100 grand, and if like these meme coins can easily go up 300 or 400% in a day. So suddenly that $100,000, instead of making it another 100,000 over 4 months, it's made 400,000 in one day. So it's essentially like a highly leveraged prediction market bet, with the added risk of your meme coin sort of losing consensus as like the way to play that specific thesis, whatever you want to call it. Again, I still think long term these coins obviously will probably go to zero, just because I don't know, like there's only really one Dogecoin, and there's a couple other meme coins that have gained some market share, but the fundamental value of all these things is zero. Like, there is no cash, there's no GCF you can run on any of these things.
No.
And it's not like Bitcoin, where it's got this like store of value sort of potential. It's like a new gold.
You're not launching new stuff on top of it. There's no utility. It's very much a trend. I think that, look, it's definitely gambling, and it's definitely gambling going into the election. And the funny thing is that it's probably going to heat up more than it's going to cool down, right? Because you're in this environment where people are wanting to put their money on, to lay it down. And
I think the way
bets.
Sorry to interrupt, Will, but the way I would actually think about a lot of these meme coins is think of them as highly leveraged ETFs. So there's a bunch of ETFs that you can buy that, they track the price of oil over the course of a day with 3x the exposure.
Yeah, right.
But if you actually look at the charts over time, they all trend towards zero because they incur so much like rollover cost from just
because they
like,
don't own. So just to like they don't own the underlying asset. It's not like they've borrowed $3 to buy, with $1 borrowed $3 to buy oil. What they've done is they're buying futures contracts that basically give them 3x exposure, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so the way I think about meme coins, besides like Dogecoin and, I guess in a lot of ways, Bitcoin's kind of a meme coin, but any type of token that clearly has no fundamental value and never will have fundamental value is kind of like what I would call a meme coin. The way to think about those is exactly like that. They are a extremely high leverage ETF with high rollover costs, which effectively sends their price down to zero over time. But if you think of them more as like a trading vehicle, like a derivative trading vehicle, then it kind of makes a little bit of sense of like what these things are. Just because, they serve a purpose as like as a trading vehicle for whatever specific thesis you want to do.
Yeah.
But again, you should never hold these things long term. They're purely a trading vehicle that over time trend towards zero.
Yeah.
Again, with a few very small exceptions.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a good enough place to end it on the discussion around meme coins. I got a feeling that we'll be talking more about this as we approach the election, for better or for worse. But great discussion today. We covered a lot of ground, talking about institutional adoption, where Wall Street's headed, public blockchains, token dispersion, meme coins, Joe Biden. We have it all here at DeFi Decoded. Past couple weeks, Andrew and I have done a lot of chatting with each other, but we've got a ton of great guests teed up for the next little while. I think our schedule is actually full basically between now, which is June 18th, where we're recording this, all the way till September. So make sure to tune in. Lots of founders, some executives, people on the policy side, creators, authors, you name it. It's going to be a terrific summer. We're not going to be slowing down. If you like this episode, please make sure to follow us, subscribe, like, and share the podcast. We will see you next time. Until then, that's it. Take care.
The information contained herein does not constitute an offer or solicitation by anyone in the United States or in any other jurisdiction in which such an offer or solicitation is not authorized, or to any person to whom it is unlawful to make such an offer or solicitation. Prospective investors who are not residents in Canada should contact their financial advisor to determine whether securities of the funds may be lawfully sold in their jurisdiction.